You probably watched part of this video, right?
I watched all of it. I watched the whole
I'm a
thing.
good student.
We're gonna just watch part of it now. So this is after they do their demonstration. This is when they start playing the song for real.
Oh, okay.
Okay? We're just gonna watch maybe, or listen to 30 seconds of this.
This is the 90%, right?
This is their 100%.
Oh.
And this is the same piece performed by a professional ensemble.
Let's say they got it. Few differences.
Come on in. Sorry, you're fine. So, what did you notice difference between the two attempts?
There was another layer in the second one. I mean, more of a.
It was a more complicated composition, right, arrangement of the piece. Yeah.
More crescendo, decrescendo, you could hear it in the
Okay, so that there was a better understanding of dynamic. Yeah.
The instruments were more in tune in the professional one.
Right. So even though the high schoolers were playing theoretically the correct notes, they could only play as correct as their instruments were tuned, right?
No strats.
And so, right, and so we get to this place where, I'm not trying to say anything bad about the demonstration that the high school instructor makes, right? He makes a very important, lesson for the parents that in a musical performance situation, 100% note accuracy is the starting point, right? There is no room below that is acceptable. But we've just seen that there's plenty of room above that to continue to improve, right? And so some of you may have just come from a high school band where 100% note accuracy, and then, maybe we have a little bit of dynamics and, we have some conversation between different parts and we start to try to really think about changes in tempo and things like that. But all of that modulation, right, has to go on top of, I got it right in the first place. Okay? So when we think about this idea of precision and accuracy, and maybe we can unpack that a little bit in a minute of what the difference between the two is. We use them almost interchangeably in our colloquial language, but they do mean different things, or we wouldn't have two words. And so we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna talk about what level of tolerance is acceptable. Right? No matter what you do, there's always some level of tolerance. And so for the high school band that we listened to before we came, right, the level of tolerance was 100% note accuracy plus some level of actually following the conductor, and hopefully your instrument's at least partially in tune and you don't have any spit in your valves, right? Like some modicum, right? Like we're in here, right? Yeah. And so that was a threshold of tolerance. And so whatever field you go into, whatever classroom you're in, there's also going to be a bar. This is the tolerance level above which you must be in order to receive credit, below which you have gone too far. It might be that your thoughts are fine, but the tolerances are out. Okay, so if I say build me a house that's 20 by 40, most builders are going to be within a half inch of that. Most builders in modern society are going to be within about a half inch of that. And that's considered an acceptable tolerance in the construction field, that when you're doing rough framing, a half inch over an entire structure, totally acceptable. Maybe even an inch, don't tell. Right? But if we were building the Large Hadron Collider, which is a much larger structure, what do you think the tolerances are for the placement of the wiring inside the electromagnets inside the world's largest particle collider?
Smaller.
A couple of microns?
Well, they couldn't get to that level of accuracy in placing those because of the technology. We're not there yet. So the tolerance level for the placement of the individual conductors that make up the semiconductors, or I mean, that make up the semi-permanent magnets that they can supercharge and supercool and make this thing that shoots protons at each other at nearly the speed of light.
Can I guess again?
Please.
5 nanometers.
I don't know. I can't do the conversion.
Oh.
It's 0.5 millimeters, plus or minus. 0.5 millimeters. So that's some space, man. Right? You can hold your finger. So that gives you a window of nearly a millimeter, right? If you go all the way from minus to plus, right? That gives you this window. And you can actually see that gap. They have that much room to move these wires. No more. And the thing is 27 kilometers in diameter.
Length.
Diameter.
Diameter?
Not circumference.
Wait.
It goes under 2 countries. So, the tolerances are different if you want to build a particle accelerator, right? Than if you want to build a house in Atchison. So we have to think about context, right? What context am I in? And what are the tolerances in this context? And how do I then take that minimum bar and achieve above it? Right? Because the tolerance level, generally in most of your classes in college, is going to say, if you meet this bar, you get a C. That's getting all the notes right. Right? It's no longer an A like it was in high school. Now it's a C. And you have to go above and beyond to earn your way up to exceptional performance in a college situation. So I want to talk about tolerances in another context now. You might know where this is.
Giza?
Giza, which is in
Egypt.
Egypt, yeah. This is the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Cheops or Khufu, depending on who you want to talk to and what language you want to speak to them in. It was the largest man-made structure in the world for nearly 5,000 years. It took us a long time to build anything bigger than this thing. And it was built with fairly, for today's standards, limited technology. Right? What we would consider limited technology. And just to give you a sense of the size, because I imagine not many of you have stood at the base of this thing, but all of you have stood outside St. Benedict's Parish Church. So this is a Google Maps, this is satellite view. So here is St. Benedict's Parish Church, there's the stairs in front of it, and that's my hand. I am standing on that little railing that's at the side of the stairs. Don't stand on that, the limestone's starting to have problems. But I'm standing right there, holding this card up at the edge of the building. So you know where that is, okay? If you look way back here in the distance, there's a red arrow pointing at a tiny yellow pixel. It's 1 pixel on this screen because the resolution's so low. On the computer over there, it's 3. You see that little tiny, like almost yellow spot? That is another one of these, 755.5 feet away. That's the average length of one of the sides at the base of the Pyramid of Khufu. The average length. So here you have them. This is one of my students holding the other card and a picture back in. That's me holding my card, 755 and a half feet away. And I guarantee you that the tolerance that I had to use to guesstimate what pixel here represented the corner of the church and what pixel there represented the corner of the sidewalk, and then to tell my students where to stand and take pictures, etc., is less accurate than the tolerances that the builders of the pyramids had. You have to be really careful when you research the accuracy of ancient technology, especially on the internet, because for the last 100 years, there's been a concerted effort to attribute ancient technological achievements to aliens. And I mean concerted. In fact, the website that you looked at, where I said look at the pictures, not the drawings.
Elongated skulls of the Incan Empire.
Right. You might have noticed some of the other links on that site. Right.
Lost ancient high technology.
Lost
Got lost in
ancient.
the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I didn't tell you not to click on any of it. So the problem is that it takes this strange leap of imagination for some people to understand that humans have this capacity to overcome incredible obstacles when they have a good reason. Right? And that's the important part, when they have a good reason. So, they say, we don't even have those kinds of tolerances today. Well, we do when we want to. Joe Blow Builder in Atchison wants to build me a house. No, he's not building to a 99.97% accuracy over any distance, like the Egyptians were. But when we need to, because otherwise our particle accelerator won't work, or won't give us the accurate results that we need, sure, we figure it out, we make it happen. So if you ever see something that says, we can't even do this today, or all they had were logs, right? Well, true, they didn't have many of the things that we benefit from, but they did have a lot of human ingenuity, and they had
Math.
They had math, and they had imagination, and they had motivation. Perhaps the most important. They did have slaves. They had lots of slaves. But there are three currently debated possibilities for how the pyramids were constructed, and in particular the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And none of them include slave labor. The Egyptians used slave labor for a lot of things. Certainly we know about at least one historical mention of slave labor in the Bible. But the current understanding from Egyptologists and archaeologists is that slave labor was not used here because of the level of craftsmanship that was required. That these were actually hired hands. They were not necessarily Egyptian. Some people think they were brought in from Lebanon and Canaan, right, from the area that we are more familiar with from the biblical historical narrative. But we are talking about a sizable workforce building a lot of stuff in a short period of time. There are three main ideas as to how that could have happened. And the two most prominent, although not accepted by everyone, are one, that rather than building a ramp up to the side of this thing where they could drag the stones up, right? Because then by the time they get to the top, the ramp actually contains as much stone as the pyramid does, because they can't just use dirt, it has to actually be a stone ramp. So then they have to remove all of that as they go. The other problem with that is if you have any kind of ramp on the outside of the structure, you can't see the sight lines you need to ensure the angular and linear accuracy. So that one is, some people are still sticking to their guns on that one. Some people say, it was a spiral ramp because that would use less stone. We're actually going to use the stone of the pyramid to form most of the ramp. So we just have sort of a thin layer on the outside, and then we get to the top, and then we just come back down in the spiral. That might have worked. Again, lots of extra stone. The corners become problems for the rolling technology for the blocks that they had at the time. And you can't sight the corners and the straight lines at the base to get the peak. And this is probably the most amazing thing in terms of numerical accuracy in the construction of the Great Pyramid, is that when they set the final golden pyramid on top of the limestone surface that was set on top of the underlying stone, it was within fractions of an inch of being directly above the center of the base. The angular differences between the sides being true north based on solar measurements are in the 99th percentile or higher. And the lengths of the sides, again, are from the longest side, which is just over 756 feet. And by just over, I mean, like, we'll talk about how much in a second. And about 8 inches less on the shortest side. Again, less variation than 99.9%. Less variation, better than a 99.9% accuracy rate. So the other two theories right now, they're getting some traction. One is an internal ramp structure. So there's a spiral ramp, but it's actually inside underneath this. And so they built that outside ramp up until this line. And then above that, they used an internal ramp that spiraled all the way up. Because if you're there, we can't really see here, but if you're there, the blocks are generally smaller once you get here. And so that allowed them to use an internal ramp structure that could handle smaller blocks, still multiple tons, and move them up as they needed to. And then it also allows for certain things in the actual burial ceremony that have been otherwise unsatisfactorily described by the other building techniques. And the final one is that they're actually building concrete, that they're casting these stones in place using calcinated limestone, which is how we make lime, how we make plaster, how we make concrete today. And so they were using all this limestone, they were calcinating some of it, they were mixing it back in with the same clay and lime that was on the site, so there's no color difference, and they were using big enough chunks that if you look at any one block, you might actually be looking at a piece of stone, not at a piece of concrete. And so you can't tell necessarily, because they might have redressed the surfaces, but that's one of the theories. Again, we're not here to debate exactly how they built it, but to say that it was important enough to these people to go to extreme lengths, not only to build this huge thing, but to build it incredibly accurately, right? To build it incredibly precisely. So what are the differences between these two terms? How might we distinguish between precision and accuracy? Anyone do target practice? Josh, will you stand on the chair?
Yeah. Am I turning it off?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
figured, but I just want to make sure.
Okay, so the target practice answer, I think, is accuracy is like hitting a bullseye. And precision is the tolerance between, like, if
There we go.
you miss twice, but they're close together, you're aiming precisely, but accuracy is actually hitting what you're.
So,
Can you say that again?
yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, so precision is consistency and closeness. So if you are missing the bullseye, maybe your sight is off, but if you're shooting precisely, then you're going to miss it in the same location every time. Accuracy is actually hitting the thing that you want to hit.
That is accurate, but not precise. If we took an average of all of those points, it would be in the center, but they're not close together. That is precise, but not accurate. If we took an average of all those points, it would be nowhere near the bullseye, but their average distance from that center point, right, is much tighter. So, accuracy means doing what you said you were going to do. Precision is about consistency. It's about repeatability, right, which the first time might have been a fluke. Can you do it again?
Eddie Oakley.
Yeah. I was listening to an interview with the former CEO of GE, and he said that he never let anybody tell him that they could do something until they had done it successfully 3 times. Pulling it off once, don't care. Until you've done it successfully 3 times, I don't trust you to say that you can do that again. So that's about this, right? I could have a new shot. Let me erase my colors here. I could have that. You come hand me your target with your single shot on the bullseye. Wow, that's awesome.
Especially if you look right into it.
Well, there's that. Let's say this is at 100 yards. It's pretty impressive, right?
Do it again.
Do it again. How many bullets did it take you to get that? Where are the rest of them? Are they even on the paper? Right? Like here's your shot. Right? Oh, I happen to notice one over here. Oh, they all went through the same hole. Yeah?
One of them, put his own arrow.
It's a scene from Jack Reacher where he wants information on Robert Duvall, and Robert Duvall runs a shooting range, and he hands him the target. He goes, "You put three in the circle, and I'll answer your question." Can't just be one.
Can't just be one. So, how does this relate to our goal here, what we're talking about of trying to demonstrate excellence, right? Or pursuing excellence as one of our goals at Benedictine College?
Well, last week we talked about habit, right? So habitual precision would be kind of the mastery. We were talking about mastery last time. So a master is habitually precise. It's kind of second nature.
And accurate.
To do it right.
Hopefully, right? What else? Before everybody came in, somebody was talking about, like for music, right? It's not that you have to be perfect from the beginning, right? You're going to make mistakes. It's learning from those mistakes so that when it's time to perform, you can pull it off without mistakes, right? And then go beyond that into the things that are potentially above and beyond, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I looked at the women's NCAA tournament, and Notre Dame won on 2 buzzer beaters, and they were interviewing the woman who made them, same woman, and he said, "Boy, it's incredibly lucky." She goes, "No, it wasn't. Because we practiced that every day. I literally tried that shot hundreds of times." And she wasn't kind of being arrogant about it, but she was definitely saying it's not a fluke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this, for what we do in college, it also I think is very helpful because it shows us why we have students major in things, right? We don't have you major in something because that's what you plan on doing with the rest of your life exactly, right? Like, we don't expect that someone who majors in math will be deriving equations every day of the rest of their life, right? Like, we do it because we want there to be something that you are really excellent at. And you can't just kind of, you can't have undifferentiated excellence. You can't, you can't just say, well, I am excellent. You have to be excellent at something that has rules and has standards. And you not only have to learn those rules, but you have to create the habit of being excellent at a specific game with its specific rules. And so the idea of a major is that you pick something that you can become really good at. Something that will take you 4 years to become really good at. And then once you know what it means to be really good at something, then you can recreate that same level of excellence, of precision, of professionalism at other kind of, whatever you end up doing as a career or not as a career, but in the rest of your life. So, you major in something precisely so you can see what it means to learn to study history well, or what it means to, to read literature deeply, or what it means to, argue or interpret the Bible in a way that will make you and look foolish, and this takes a lot of work. And so I think the very idea of majors is really helpful for conveying how much work excellence takes.
a short anecdote to go along with that. So a student of mine, actually the guy who was in the picture holding the card, is a wrestler. He's one of the wrestlers on the BC team. And he's really good. He's gone to nationals a couple times now at the college level. And he's been wrestling for a long time. And he was telling me about a trip he took with his brother. They went to Thailand. His brother has gone on from wrestling in high school and college to studying martial arts around the world. So Alex went with him to Thailand, and I said, "Well, how did that go? You know, were you doing stuff with me?" He said, "Yeah, I was getting my ass kicked." And I said, "Oh yeah?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, because they're not fighting following the rules of Greco-Roman wrestling." And he was standing there like, doing this, and the guy was just punching him in the face, and he can't do that. Like, he hasn't been trained. So he's really good within the thing that he is excellent at, right? He spent a lot of time getting really excellent at that. But in this other field, right, even a closely related field of hand-to-hand combat, he is worthless because he doesn't understand the rules. And he doesn't understand what it means to be excellent within that system. So I think that's an interesting thing to point out of, right, within the college system, right, we do choose majors, and there is a good reason for that.
And one of the things that can be a struggle, at least, for theology, I was having this discussion with a student just yesterday. It was like, I was asking him, so what is your paper, how's your paper looking like? And he's like, oh, it's really good. I was like, what are your sources? And he's like, oh, it's the Bible. Okay, like what other ones? Oh, yeah, the Bible, right? And I was like, well, all right, like what books of the Bible is it about? Like, well, the New Testament ones, right? And I was like, what you have here is kind of like, my reflections on paging through the Bible, but you don't have a work of theology yet, right? Like, until you're engaging other people's scholarship, until you know what a professional source looks like, until you know how to narrow your question down. We have not yet gotten into the realm of my reflections on the Bible versus academic theology. And so it's that work of kind of showing students what precision would look like and emphasizing to them that what they say at the end of the semester and how they think about a question at the end of the semester should look nothing at all like what they would have done the first week of the semester. That conveying the idea of precision means looks like is.
Right. So every answer that your student was giving to that question is one of these dots, right? They're all on there somewhere, and together they're accurate, but they're totally imprecise. Like, yes, I'm going to use the New Testament. Well, that's not false, right? It's on the target, but it doesn't really get you anywhere.
It's actually in Newman's Idea of a University, a chapter on elementary studies, where he offers a kind of interview of an inaccurate would-be college student trying to work his way in. What books are you proposing to be examined on? So long pause. Then he lists all of them on the syllabus. So no, that's all of the eligible books, but which? Is it Xenophon? Plato? Xenophon. Xenophon wrote a lot of books. Which one? What does the title Anabasis mean? It was really a very painful sort of exercise.
Yeah. Getting back to your example with this, your student wrestler, right? Having developed that expertise on his own in a certain area, it certainly made him better prepared to recognize excellence in Thailand, right?
Oh,
We
yeah.
saw it,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, so part of this is we want our students understanding how to see excellence and recognize it in precision and accuracy when they encounter it, even though it's outside of their own level.
That's a
own realm, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we want them to be able to do.
Yeah.
And to defer to that.
Right, and to recognize, because they've been through it, to say, oh, now I understand what you must have had to go through to get that excellence.
And while I don't have that expertise, I certainly defer to you, who obviously does. And has put in the legwork, and I'll
Yeah, I want to kind of also agree with Terry on this, because when you said oh, well, he's worthless in the Thai tie matching back. I was really up with you until you got to there, because I had to think that he's still faring better against the tie wrestler than I would. As hard as that is to believe.
At least he can take a punch, right?
It's a little bit better. I mean, because
But an exegesis.
I would pummel them all. No, but because I think one of the claims that we want to make is once you've achieved excellence at one thing, you're better positioned to achieve excellence at a second thing. And so, like he may not be excellent at tie wrestling or boxing or whichever one it was, but he is better positioned to become excellent at it than I am. and so that's kind of the nature of a habit or a virtue, is that once you achieve a virtue, a habit, one excellence, it assists you in achieving additional excellences in new areas. So that the person who can imagine what an excellent piece of historiography looks like is better positioned to recognize an excellent piece of biological research than someone who
He's not an expert in anything.
thinking that maybe the pyramids were built by aliens, right, is completely ready to like listen to a YouTube video on immunology, right?
I want to keep going. So
because I think that the student who, for example, tries to argue that their paper is good, right? I mean, there's a thing, you don't define excellence. It's predefined before you get there, right? The standards are already there. I think it'd be helpful for them to know that they look like the people on American Idol who are convinced that they are really good at singing, right? And they're convinced at it to the point where they have to become internationally embarrassed because
Before
it's
they-
shown to the world that they're completely clueless.
And they still may leave clueless.
Yeah, sometimes they leave.
They still don't
angry,
believe
clueless.
it, right? So remember I told you that the difference in the length of the sides of the Great Pyramid of Khufu was less than 8 inches. Right? This is 8 inches of paper. That is the difference between the longest side of the Great Pyramid of Khufu and the shortest side. It's 7.992 inches. That is 99.9% of the sheets of paper that were in the stack originally. So these 2 sheets of paper out of 2,000 have created a greater error if we think about this being almost 8 inches, which if I gave you one of these rulers and asked you to measure this stack, you would tell me that it's 8 inches tall. There's greater error in that statement than there is in the length of any one side of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And you're saying, well, that's crazy. And you measure to the 1,000th of an inch, even though most of our freshmen are probably not thinking that, right? But all of you can measure to the 1,000th of an inch. On the sheet of paper in front of you, and if you need a sheet of paper, let me know. I can hand you one to make it speed things up. Anyone want to thank you? You've got it. You just need a sheet of paper. You're going to make one mark on it. Anyone else? Everybody? Nick? Okay. So what I want you to do is make a line an inch long. No, look at it. I mean, you don't have to just feel an inch in your arm. Look at the line that you're making. Make a line an inch long. And then I'm going to pass around some rulers.
Can you use the yardstick before it advances?
No. You don't have the ruler yet.
So we're just guessing like what we think.
How close, how much of an expert are you at knowing what an inch is at this point?
No, smart move. Yeah. Follow the line.
Oh, yeah, wait, this is.
Oh, I'm waiting.
8.5 by 11, wait a second.
Now make a 1-inch line right below it.
Oh, almost exactly.
3/4 of an inch.
I'm sure you are almost exactly something, all of you.
There you go.
Proud of myself.
Now, if I didn't give you a piece of paper before, make sure I give you one now, because I want to guarantee some accuracy here.
Someone doesn't sell, does someone.
Oh, yours is good. So, if I didn't give you a sheet before, make sure you get one now. Have this piece of paper.
I've been teaching French for almost 30 years and still don't know how to. Oh, I thought you were.
So, how close were you? Close? Not close?
75%.
I was just over
Not an
half
A,
the inch.
not an A.
Not an A. Okay, a 1/16 of an inch off. Anyone closer than a 1/16?
I'm about a 64th off.
64.
Nice.
Okay, so
An eighth.
I'm an 8 off.
I'm an eighth off too.
I was an
Yeah, about a 16.
Oh, we'll never get there this way.
what's next?
128. Oh, these are little half.
These little ones are 37.
I'm on I'm on 30. I'm 32.
256.
I was thinking they were 16.
Yeah, these little ones are 37s.
1/256 is 0.004 of an inch, 4 thousandths of an inch, or 4 thou if you talk to a machinist, right? And if you take that sheet of paper I just gave you and run your hand from the table onto the paper, that's how thick it is. And you know that you can feel a thinner sheet of paper. This is 20-pound copy bond. Speaking of accuracy and precision, if you just say 20-pound paper, you are accurate but imprecise. Because there's 20-pound copy bond, there's 20-pound card, there's 20-pound this, and there's 20-pound that. And so if you want to have a naming system that is more precise, you could say GSM, which is grams per square meter, which is the weight of the paper over a certain thickness. But you still have to say what kind of paper it is, because some papers are pressed and some are not. And so the density and the thickness of the paper will vary based on what kind of paper it is, not just how much it weighs per square meter. So 1/256th of an inch. So we're dealing with, again, 8 thousandths out of 8 inches is more error, right, than the builders of the pyramids had over nearly 800 feet, if we round up.
Do you happen to know how like Chichen Itza and its accuracy and precision compares to Giza?
No, but you know who would? The guy who wrote that website we looked at. My point being that we don't need to know exactly what kind of technology the Egyptians had to know that when they were carving those facing stones, those limestone pieces that went on the outside, that white limestone that they brought in from a further distance to be the bright white pyramid in the desert, right, that would reflect the sun's rays. They didn't need a special machine to tell them whether it was too thick or not. They could put the two stones next to each other and run their finger across it. Just like you did on this piece of paper, right? And you've all held a Bible at some point in your life. Okay. Were the Bible pages as thick as this 20-pound copy bond?
No, not usually.
Not generally, right? That would be a Bible this thick. And most of your Bibles are, the family Bible, right? But the pocket Bible you carry with you has Bible paper. That's what it's called, Bible paper. And you can still feel the thickness of the Bible. I don't even know how thick that is. It's probably about 1/1000th of an inch or maybe a little bit less. So you can feel one of those pages. You know that thickness. And if you were the guy who was an expert at carving stone and getting a really flat surface, you better believe that when you sight down that line and you can see that tiny little waver and you run your finger across the stone and you feel that tiny little bump, you're going to know how to get rid of it. And you don't need to talk to an alien to do it. You have a reason to. Now, the guy building a house in Atchison, he doesn't have a reason to do that. No one's holding him to that threshold, to that tolerance. All he has to do is make sure that the next guy who comes along doesn't complain too much, because if that guy complains, the person who's building the house, who's paying for it, is going to hear about it. And he's going to get in trouble, right? But as long as the plumber doesn't complain that the carpenter put the board in the wrong place, the homeowner never hears. Till the house falls in. So, my point with this stack of paper and with all of this is that once you realize your own ability to identify even a seemingly insignificant difference, you can become more precise. Right? In whatever field you choose to go into, whatever major you decide you want to be an expert in. Right? And like you said, once you make that realization, I can be an expert in this, I can be discerning in this field, you will better understand what it might mean to be discerning in another field, which will make you a better citizen, right? It'll make you a better Christian. It'll make you a better person, because you'll understand that this incredibly complex world is not just full of YouTube videos. It's full of all sorts of things, and sometimes that 4/1000th of an inch matters. You know where it matters is in the Large Hadron Collider. If the insulation on the wire that they use to make those supercooled magnets could be refined further, they could increase the accuracy of the machine. They're actually limited by the manufacturing processes that are used to make the wire. And they're buying the best wire they can. Right? It's not like they're like, oh, let's go down to the hardware store. Right? They're buying the best wire that is humanly possible to make. And that is what's setting the tolerance. Then they have to say, okay, how precisely can we place that conductor? Well, we have to know how what the thickness of the insulation is around it. Right? And then we have to know, what our clamps are and how much they're going to squeeze on that insulation, because that little squeezing, if it happens imprecisely, right, is going to move the conductor the wrong direction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it falls out from there. And eventually we get to 8 inches off because somebody wasn't paying attention. They didn't have their paper feeler tuned up that day. So, my suggestion to you, people teaching this class, is that because the required or core reading, right, the group reading for this week is a 15-minute YouTube video and looking at pictures on our website, you probably should. We can maybe pull the pictures off and cite them without a link that's clickable, so that our students don't get lost, figuring out how aliens invented the Mayan civilization, or civilization in general. I would suggest that you pick something from your own field in which the precision of the argument is important, where the argument being made is legible to someone who's not an expert, but where the argument being made is one about precision, right? It's an argument of, this is how it used to be done, and then I figured out this, and now I can do it better because I've narrowed down the slop, right? Or it's about, if we use this word instead of this word, it helps us distinguish between what happened here and what we could do in the future. The thing on the radio this morning was changing the guidelines for use of deadly force for police from reasonable to necessary. So right now they're allowed to fire if they can say that it was reasonable. And there's a bill, I think it's in Maryland, to change that language to necessary.
How many police
California.
have left?
Thank you. And that's one of the things that the authors of the bill acknowledge. It is dangerous. This will potentially increase fatalities among police officers, but it will decrease fatalities among everyone else.
A good example, not from my field, is the Hubble telescope.
Oh yeah.
When they ground the lens of that, they, of course, spent millions and millions of dollars and sent it up into space, and then the images were cloudy. And then they went back to figure out why that was the case. Well, it turns out that the machine that had ground them, they had to put paint on one of the pieces when they put the machine together. And the difference of the paint meant the grinding, the thickness of the paint, meant the grinding of the telescope wasn't accurate enough to give a clear image. So then they had to spend millions and more dollars to fix it while it's in outer space.
They had to put glasses on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because and the thickness of, and I haven't read the article, so it would probably tell us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you are in the coatings industry, right? The way that people talk about coatings is in mils of thickness. 1 mil,
Thousandth of an inch.
So, we could figure out what the relationship is between that amount of paint
Right.
and this piece of paper.
Yeah, something like that. That's right. Then it's all off. Cost the taxpayers millions of dollars.
So, that's what I got about precision, accuracy, pursuit of excellence. A point that maybe I haven't been explicit about that you might want to be, or you might think about how you could emphasize, is that you have the tools to do this, right? You all have a finger, right? This kind of thing is not something that is beyond you. Julie, do not cut your students' hands off and then...
Oh, you said I had a finger, and I was like, oh, I do. But then I was thinking, you probably didn't mean that one.
I thought you were giving me trouble for the non-fingered student.
No, I was just thinking of a different finger.
Gotcha. You could probably still feel 0.004 of an inch with that finger. But my point is that you have the tools to do this, right? That the human ingenuity that built the pyramids, that built the Large Hadron Collider, that can distinguish when precision is important and what level of tolerance is acceptable at any given moment, right? That's something that we all have. And so helping the student, this is not about shaming students because they don't know how to draw an inch-long line, right? That exercise is just to get us to this. Like learning to, do you know how to read a ruler? The lines on those rulers are wider than 1/256th of an inch. So you couldn't read down to that level of precision with those rulers.
But that raises also an interesting question about reading cases. All right. So one of the things which I run across is that at least at some universities, one reason why they allow the A range to begin at 85 is so that when you run across the Chinese students doing physics, there'll be room for distinguishing between the various types of A's. But that means you have to make the exam for the A range hard enough for one to be able to detect that an 85 is really earned.
It depends on what's the point of your grading. Is it to distinguish between students, to separate different classes of student, or is it to tell when a student has achieved a certain level of mastery? If they've all got hundreds and that's really what they've all got, then it doesn't matter how much above 100 that one student is.
In which case, you're using letters would be meaningless. P and F would probably be good enough.
No, I think it's more the idea that if we say that's all you need to do, then we're not encouraging true excellence. We're supporting adequacy.
Well, it depends on what the purpose of a course is, though. Some courses are about building basic skill, and when you pass them, you're saying the student has basic skill. Some courses are about saying you can be an engineer,
Like
and
this
you
one.
can't.
Yeah, pass, fail.
And then it maybe is more important to know who's the best engineer, right? Versus who just understands the basic skills and can move on to the next thing.
Or to help students get beyond grades, to help them get to want excellence rather than a grade.
Well, what I thought was helpful at the beginning is because the difference between the tolerance in a building code and the pyramids is because they care more. It's not a lack of ability. We could do that, but it's not worth our while to do that, right? But, so people, you can tell from a teacher's perspective that there are students who are, have the smarts, but there are also students who care, who spend the time. And you're going to spend the time doing what you care about. But do you care about this or not? Do you care about that's what a student should mean, right? Somebody who is eager, somebody who's careful, diligent, right? Somebody who does it with love and with care. And I think that most people would recognize that at the end of the day, they didn't do better on this assignment because they didn't care to.
I really liked your suggestion of using an article in our different fields that hinges on precision, because I like how that makes this transition from our analogy with physical precision in the pyramids to what college does, which is intellectual precision. So I really like that suggestion.
Well, and the builders of the pyramid, I think, would argue that physical precision is intellectual, because what they were trying to do was make contact with the divine. And in order to do that, the building had to be as perfect as possible. And so it bridges the gap between the physicality and the numinous.
Sure.
When we ask this question, nature the same as or just like homoousios, homoousios? That tiny little...
It's only one iota different.
You want to be a Christian or not, though?
It's funny, all this, we have all these terms of phrase, right, that are about imperceptible measurements, right? A gnat's hair, the width of a human hair, depends on the human. And the part of the body.
Yes,